In case you were wondering, no, I'm not dead yet. And I had a stupid thought. Is Petr Yan really 0-2 against Aljamain Sterling? In my opinion, the most overrated fighter is the fighter who just won, and the most underrated fighter is the guy who just lost. We have this impulse to imagine the last win or loss as a sort of permanent status, as the only authentic declaration of a fighter's worth. In spite of going into UFC 259 on an impressive 5-fight win streak, Aljamain Sterling was mocked, clowned, and dismissed for over a year for winning his belt on a foul in a fight where his opponent was clearly the better fighter. He then took some time off to recover from injury, which added fuel to the fire of the online hate mob. It reached the point where in the rematch, the Florida crowd were chanting for Yan's name rather than for their own compatriot.
Wow, they're chanting, "Let's go, Petr." They're saying Peter, but you know what they mean.
We all know how the fight turned out. Sterling made some great adjustments from the first fight and managed to do just enough to get the decision, retaining his belt and galvanizing the few fans who hadn't abandoned him over the course of the previous year. This has resulted in a lot of takes that simply cannot be rationalized, such as suggesting that there is no need for a third fight because Aljo is 2-0. It's fine if people want to believe that, but if they want to be consistent in their beliefs, they would have to also recognize Matt Hamill as being a superior fighter to Jon Jones. Any reasonable person would recognize the first fight as being utter domination by Yan prior to the foul and subsequent disqualification. But what about the rematch? It was certainly a close fight, but were the judges right? Did Sterling win? Just to clarify, I'm a Petr Yan fan, and I don't much care for Sterling. I will not make any claim of being unbiased, nor do I think there even is such a thing as an unbiased opinion. But at the same time, I was not among those who crapped on Aljo for how he got the belt. He did what he had to do. That's all there is to it. He guaranteed himself a rematch, whereas if he had just fought on, that probably would have been his last shot at gold. A foul is a foul, and Sterling was not obliged to fight on. Taking the DQ victory was a career decision that guaranteed Sterling a decent payday and another crack at a fighter who had just bested him. I can't really fault him for taking that option.
Ain't nothing wrong with that.
If anything, I thought Anthony Smith should have done the same against Jon Jones at UFC 235. So back to the rematch. There really is no debate about the second or third rounds. Sterling takes Yan down, controls him for an eternity, takes his back, and has him in a very precarious position. Yan survives without taking too much damage, but there is no argument for him winning either of these rounds. Rounds 4 and 5 were likewise easy to judge. Yan landed the better strikes in the fourth, and when the fight did go to the ground, it was Yan who was in the dominant positions this time around. There were even some funny sequences in this round where it looks like Aljo is trying to coax Yan into committing the same foul that disqualified him from the first fight. Round 5 was more of the same. Yan gets the better of the striking exchanges, like this knee right here, and even has some control time. Sterling's takedown attempts were not as successful as they were earlier in the fight either. We can see that with the single leg attempt, which resulted in Yan taking Sterling's back. So overall, we had 2 rounds clearly for Sterling and 2 rounds clearly for Yan, which makes round 1 the decisive round. Now this round did not have a ton of activity, but I do feel that Yan landed the better strikes and was more aggressive. So I personally scored for him, which would make the final result either a Yan victory or a draw if you give Sterling a 10-8 in the second round. Now fanboy logic dictates that any decision I disagree with is by law a robbery. But being fair here, you cannot fault the 2 judges who gave round 1 to Sterling. Round 1 really was a wash, and if anything, it's surprising that none of the judges scored a 10-8 round 2. Nonetheless, I would argue that Yan did get better as the fight progressed, while Sterling was losing his steam. So if this fight had taken place in 1, where fights are judged as a whole rather than by round, Yan may very well have been declared the winner. Nonetheless, the outcome was exactly what Sterling needed to redeem himself in the eyes of some rather merciless fans. So I'm happy for him, but I don't think for a second that he's the superior fighter to Yan. It seems the UFC does not want to do an immediate rematch, and that's perfectly fine. Yan is set to fight Sean O'Malley at UFC 280, which I think is about as close to a sure thing as you can get in this sport. But a third fight between Yan and Sterling will happen. That much is inevitable. And in spite of Sterling's great performance in the rematch, I still heavily favor Yan.